It's the weekend. Be good to yourself. It's Katz's Corner with Dr. Aaron Katz and Dr. Philippa Cheatham, where you can get simple, straightforward answers to your questions about health, from diet and supplements to lifestyle changes. To reach Dr. Katz and Dr. Cheatham, call 800-848-WABC. Now, live on 77 WABC, the chairman of urology at Winthrop University Hospital in New York, with co-host Philippa Cheatham, attending in urology at Winthrop University Hospital. Here is Dr. Aaron Katz.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome again to another live round of Katz's Corner here on WABC Radio in New York. I'm your host, Dr. Aaron Katz. We are live again, or I'm back again. Took a couple of weeks off, but now I'm back at 1-800-848-WABC. That's 1-800-848-9222. Give us a call. We've got a great show for you this morning. Good morning, Philippa. How are you?
Good morning and welcome back. I missed you.
Yeah, thanks. Had to take a couple of weeks off. Was feeling a bit under the weather. And thanks for taking the helm here. But I listened to your shows. They were terrific.
Thank you very much. You feeling better?
Yeah, no, I'm 100% better and have a lot of energy this morning.
Watch out.
Watch out. Slept well last night, and I hope all of you did, because this morning we have an interesting show for you on sleep. And I think that, Philippa, we've been talking a bit about this with our guest before the show, that how sleep affects so many of our patients with prostate conditions and general health conditions, and the sleep can have such a profound effect on your mental and physical well-being.
Sure, and if you're one of these people who's a bad sleeper, it doesn't just affect you, does it? It affects whoever you're in bed with.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Not only that, the next day you're irritable, and it can affect so many of the ways that you carry about your life. So to help us with this discussion, we've invited a very special guest this morning, Dr. Kanta Ahmed, and she is a subspecialist. She's board certified in sleep disorders in both in medicine and family practice, as well as pulmonary medicine, and she is an associate professor of medicine at the State University of Stony Brook, and she practices sleep disorders at Winthrop University Hospital in Garden City. And we are so glad that you could join us this morning. Good morning, Dr. Ahmed.
Good morning. It's great to be here at this early hour.
Yes. Well, thanks for coming. How did you sleep last night?
I slept well.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Our sleep specialist should sleep well. So one of the first things that we wanted to ask you, when we're seeing our patients that get up in the night and they say, oh, I'm waking up because I have to urinate, and that's very common, by the way, extremely common in our men over the age of 50. How do you discriminate if this is a sleep problem, or is it a urinary problem, or is it both? Which came first?
Great question, Dr. Katz. And first of all, I want to commend you because you're actually thinking about the health of your patients during sleep, which is a relatively new phenomenon. For centuries, we've been practicing medicine thinking only about the waking patient, but the field of sleep medicine began in 1973. So in many men, particularly the patient population you share, which is mostly men over 50, urinating at night is part of a normal routine. And most men will be better educated about prostate health than sleep health. But frequently, I see patients who've been evaluated by urologists for frequent urination at night, and they actually have a sleep disorder called obstructive sleep apnea or sleep apnea, which sometimes shows up only with interrupted sleep. Dr. Cheatham made a great point that it doesn't just disturb the male patient, it disturbs his spouse or bed partner, whoever that may be. And they don't realize that it may be a sign of a sleep disorder. The same thing in women who also will show up with frequent urination at night, and it will be a sign of a snoring, sleep-disordered breathing problem.
It's amazing how many patients come in and they tell us that they snore or that their partner's complaining that they're snoring. And snoring has some physiological relevance, doesn't it? It's not just related to the fact that you may be carrying a bit of extra weight around your neck.
Absolutely. Number one take-home message is snoring is never normal in any age group, whether it's your child, it's your spouse, or your parent. Very important.
So when you say it's not normal, does that mean that if your partner tells you that you're snoring, And this is bringing home a very important point to me personally. Does that mean that you need to be evaluated by a doctor?
It's an important symptom to be evaluated, yes.
By
what
kind of doctor?
Our recommendation, of course, is to get yourself to a board-certified sleep specialist at an accredited sleep center. There are many qualified ears, nose, and throat physicians or oromaxillofacial surgeons that will also give you the information. But the reason the snoring needs to be evaluated is it's a narrowing in the upper airway, and the body is working to breathe more than normal. Just like a river that comes into a narrow gorge and makes more noise, that's exactly what's going on in the airway.
It's often quite difficult to get people to accept that they snore, though. I mean, so often you tell people that they snore and they deny it. And particularly if they've been snoring for many, many years, it's quite difficult for them to accept that this may be a medical problem.
Actually, even bigger problem than that is people don't realize snoring is not normal because they may be growing up in households where everybody snores. But one big point to make is that you share a very large population of Americans, men over 50 with prostate problems. About 1 in 3 Americans has a sleep disorder, so we're talking 100 million people. 1 in 4 adults, particularly with our obesity problem, will have sleep disordered breathing. So there is almost no one that I interview with a sleep disorder that is not demonstrating frequent urination at night. So when you're having frequent urination at night, think not only of your urologist, but think, am I snoring or is my partner snoring? And think of a sleep specialist.
Many of the people that see a sleep specialist or see an internist for this are quickly prescribed Ambien. And recently there was a lot of controversy about this medication, especially in women, stating that the dose was probably too high and that they were having some side effects. Tell us about that.
That's a great point that you bring up. And in fact, it was discussed in the New York Times on January 10th, if anybody wants to read it in the lay press. Ambien is one of the oldest prescribed and approved medications for insomnia. And it's well known for its side effects because millions of people have been treated with Ambien.
And for our European listeners, we're talking about a drug very similar to temazepam.
It's not quite exactly the same. It's it's a distant relative of temazepam, but it is. We teach our patients at Winthrop a great deal about sleep and driving safety, and this came up in terms of the editorial that people who are on approved doses of Ambien, particularly women, may still have some functioning Ambien on board when they were driving in the morning. So they've made recommendations to prescribe the lower dose, which is 5 milligrams, not 10 milligrams. Now, we at Winthrop in our Sleep Disorder Center educate everybody to use the lowest amount of dose. I give my patients a lot of freedom. We can give them the range of doses, but we always teach them take the lower dose, no more than 4 nights out of 7. And this is called non-nightly flexible scheduled dosing. But the furore in the press misses the whole point, which is that we need to educate all Americans about driving when they are alert. There are many more Americans who are driving when they're sleep deprived than those that are driving on prescribed medicines.
And would you give somebody like Aaron and I the same dose? I mean, we've got very different body habitus.
Well, the traditional teaching was anybody under 65, and I believe both of you are under 65, would be on 10 milligrams. Based on these new FDA recommendations, they are suggesting that women should be started on 5 milligrams under 65. I'm not sure that this is going to change my practice because we practice fairly conservatively anyway.
Our wonderful guest this morning, Dr. Kanta Ahmed, is a sleep specialist at Winthrop University Medical Center in Garden City. And we're talking to her about sleep disorders that affect both men and women. Dr. Ahmed, one question. In terms of Ambien, does it matter if someone tells you that they have a problem falling asleep, or if they can go to sleep and then they just can't, and then they wake up?
Great questions. You're covering 2 of the 4 definitions of insomnia. When someone says insomnia, to me, it could mean trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, waking up before socially desirable at the 2, 3, 4 a.m. hour, or just not feeling properly refreshed. In fact, non-restorative sleep or sleep that's not refreshing are all kinds of insomnia, and Ambien may have a role. But any medication, any prescribed pharmacological agent has to be added with behavior and education, or it can never do the work.
Tell us about that. What, before you go to medication, do you do the behavioral things? And if you do them, tell our listeners what they can do at home beyond just medication.
Well, before we were on air, you were talking about very important lifestyle strategies, avoiding late night light, which is almost impossible in the American lifestyle.
Particularly New York.
particularly in the city that never sleeps. Exactly.
But do you mean light in the room, or are you talking about someone sitting in their bed with a laptop on?
Excellent. All sources of light, because the brain's signal that sleep is coming is translated through a hormone called melatonin. You may have seen some melatonin supplements in health food stores. But we kill our own intrinsic melatonin when we sit in front of iPads or on Blackberries or in flat screen TVs. And most Americans have televisions in their bedroom.
I mean, I don't know about you, but the first thing I do in the morning is look at my phone, and the last thing I do at night is look at my phone. Right. And we're on the BlackBerry all the time.
That's what we call insufficient sleep hygiene.
Oh, dear.
And anything else? What about things like teas? Do you recommend any of those chamomile or things like that?
Well, actually, I was thinking the opposite way. The other thing that's wrong with our society is we're hyper-caffeinated, and as you know, that causes people to urinate more frequently. But many patients struggling with their sleep are trying to use caffeine in order to stay alert, and that can impede sleep very dramatically.
If you're listening to the show, please call 1-800-848-9222. If you have a question on sleep, I'm sure there is nobody on the planet who has not had difficulty sleeping at some point. I have two questions for you. First question is, what about exercise and sleep? Is it bad to go to the gym at 10 o'clock at night?
This is a great question. And there is a very interesting relationship between exercise and sleep. If you do end your exercise within 5 hours of your desired bedtime, you are going to enhance your sleep and introduce increased deep sleep, which is very good. Yes, and deep sleep is what we think makes us feel better refreshed. But if you exercise too close to bedtime, it is alerting because it raises the body temperature. And sleep can only come when our body temperature is cooling, which takes hours, the core body temperature.
And my next question is, I'm definitely a night owl. I always have been. Aaron is definitely an early bird. I would love to be an early bird, to be able to wake up. There has never been a single day in my life when the alarm clock has gone off and I've wanted to jump out of bed. I'm always the kind of person that wants to press the snooze button. Can I change to becoming an early bird, or am I always going to be programmed to be a night owl?
Great question. And in fact, some people intrinsically do have these preferences. So a night owl, we would call someone with delayed sleep phase syndrome. It's not a problem if you can arrange your practice and your surgery and all of your lifestyle later in the day. You would function at peak. But it becomes a problem if you're required to function at the other end of the day. Things can change. Like at the moment, we should be exposed to very bright light to keep ourselves alert. No sunglasses in the morning when it's sunny to try and get that extra blast of sunlight which wakes you up. And then caffeinated teas. At the other end, to get back to your question, Dr. Katz, teas at bedtime, I don't really know of anything that promotes sleep in the form of a tea, though a lot of patients will go for chamomile. But hot milk with honey is known to promote sleep. I don't recommend it because putting milk in your belly will give you reflux, and that actually disrupts your sleep. But it releases something called tryptophan, which is also present in turkey and bananas, which is promoting sleep. So there are all kinds of factors.
But what do you recommend if, for example, I need to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday to go and do a case over at Winthrop early? I'm just not ready to go to sleep at 9 o'clock in the evening. What would you recommend?
I think for you to turn it around in a very short time is impossible. And you probably would have to rely on external cues, by which we mean multiple alarm clocks. And we have lots of patients with a cell phone alarm clock, an actual person waking them up, a telephone.
But my problem is going to sleep at an earlier time.
So for going to sleep, you would need prescribed hypnotics, meaning sleep medicines. So you would have to be treated like a pilot or like an emergency worker who relies on prescribed medicines that are including Ambien, but also prescribed stimulants that can be FDA approved for patients like you.
7:15 in the morning. If you're just waking up, it's Katz's Corner. We're talking with my co-host, Dr. Philippa Cheatham, as well as our wonderful guest, Dr. Kanta Ahmed, who is a sleep disorder specialist at Winthrop University Hospital. We're talking a little bit about food and things, and I'm just thinking, one of the things that I was thinking about was alcohol. And, it's probably very prevalent that a lot of people, men and women, choose alcohol to aid in their sleep. But what are your thoughts there?
That's a great observation, and it's certainly the commonest remedy that most Americans reach for.
Yeah, I mean, let me have a glass of wine or two, and it'll put me to sleep. And without going to a sleep specialist, this is what they're doing, right?
This is what 6 to 13% of Americans will reach for alcohol to try and treat their own sleep disorders. But if they're struggling with chronic insomnia, by which we mean more than 4 weeks of symptoms, that goes up to 35%. And it can be very detrimental. It will definitely shorten the time to fall asleep and make you go soundly asleep quickly. But as soon as you metabolize the alcohol level drops and the patient wakes up. The danger is that they may then take a second drink, and it's the road to alcohol dependence.
No, absolutely. And just one of the thoughts, just give us your thoughts again about the melatonin, because this is very common. People, you go into the GNC or Vitamin Shop, there's 15 different brands of melatonin. I don't know what the proper dose is. I don't know what to tell people. Do they take it sublingual under the tongue? Do they take the pill? And then are there any risks to doing this?
Well, I want to commend you that your patients are even speaking to you about their sleep. That means that they know they can get information from you about that. I have very mixed feelings about melatonin. As you know, in America, it's available as a dietary supplement. In Britain, it's prescribed, and it's not widely available. When you get a dietary supplement in the United States, that supplement is coming from bovine extracts. That means it's coming from animal matter, from cow urine, the extracts made in many cases. And the dose is not regulated depending on which brand you buy.
Cow urine?
It's a bovine extract that it's... This is
as
where
many of these supplements are.
Which is where this is, according to my reading. However, it's not as specific. It acts on all kinds of places. The goal for the melatonin supplement is to act on a place in the brain that controls the timing of sleep. But my feeling is there are so many things we're doing in our American lifestyles that are shutting off our own powerful melatonin-making centers that I'd like you to kill the television and the internet and get into the sunshine to use these natural ways that we have all around us than take a supplement that I can't regulate and I can't be confident about.
And I do a huge amount of international travelling, and there's a lot about melatonin and jet lag. And do you think there's a role for that?
It definitely is, because it does what we call phase advance. So it could help you turn from a night owl into an early bird over the course of days. And for that in the United States, we have a prescribed agent called Rosarum, which we could use, and that could be beneficial, but I rarely prescribe it.
Do you take anything like this when you're on a long flight?
No, actually, there are a few strategies for international travel, and that's always to take a daytime flight, which most people don't want to do because it's an extra day of vacation, to pack a day before your departure so that you don't become sleep deprived.
Sure,
and then as soon as you land to whatever time zone you're in, do what the locals are doing. Go out into the bright sunshine. Avoid sunglasses, even if you're in sunny Jamaica or sunny India, let's say. So there are a few things that you can do, and anticipate that you may be not functioning at your peak. So you don't want to fly to London and do a critical robotic urological surgery right as soon as you get off the plane.
Yeah, especially I've seen a lot of people popping the Ambien and also ordering a couple of drinks. I was on a flight recently, and the guy, I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Oh yeah, I'm taking my Ambien and I'm ordering a couple of drinks." I said, "You sure that's safe? Is that
was
safe?"
that business class that you were in? Because it sounds
yes.
like business class behavior.
Yeah, it was.
But yes, this is very common, and it's dangerous. And in fact, tomorrow and later on this month, Winthrop has been featured, and I have been part of this documentary on parasomnias, which is behaviors emerging out of sleep. That's going to be airing on Monday and Tuesday, and later in the month on CUNY Cable TV, CUNY TV. And the combination of Ambien and alcohol produces sleepwalking and what we call automatic behaviors out of sleep. So getting into your car and driving while you're impaired, that can happen on Ambien alone. You marry Ambien to alcohol, and you're almost certainly happening, as it did to a former Kennedy politician recently.
Wow.
You may have heard of.
Can you say a little bit more, Consa, about your passion of people having driving issues with sleep?
Yes.
We talked about that last night. We are so uninformed about the role of sleep in our society. There are so many accidents that have been linked to sleep deprivation. Chernobyl has been one of them. The Exxon Valdez world-famous oil tanker disaster. Some of the major accidents recently.
The ferry here in Staten Island?
I suspect, yes. There was one a few years ago where somebody had Ambien in their bloodstream. But the actual need for sleep is poorly understood. We live with a cultural value in the United States of what's called sleep machismo. The one that goes to bed latest and gets up earliest is the most successful. The CEO is at work first, not and leaves last. So we value sleep deprivation, but it impairs our performance, including in driving, to the same degree as driving under the influence of alcohol.
Our wonderful guest this morning, Dr. Kanta Ahmed, runs the sleep disorder unit at Winthrop University Hospital. Tell us, if a patient comes out to see you, and they can reach you, by the way, at 516-663-3907, or, of course, go on to winthrop.org. I've seen the sleep center. It's beautiful. It looks like a Ritz-Carlton hotel. It's absolutely a beautiful place. You have a number of beds there, and you monitor people. Tell us, who is a candidate for the sleep monitoring studies that you do, and how are those? How do they help you in determining if you need medicine or?
Great question, and our sleep center is really a huge representation of Winthrop's commitment to sleep medicine, and it's actually run by Dr. Michael Weinstein, my partner. I don't run it, but what we do there is we take first a very detailed interview. The patient has to do a lot of homework before they come in and see me, so we give them a lot of scales and questionnaires, and many of them don't realize that they have sleep problems until they fill them out.
Who's referring those patients to you?
Many of my patients self-refer, so if you think that you need a sleep evaluation, you can come in, and most insurers support that. Based on the interview, we may decide you need some behavioral intervention, you need some education, or if you're snoring, or you are walking in your sleep, or talking, or other movements, you've injured yourself or someone else in your sleep, you may need to come and sleep with us at what you describe as the Ritz-Carlton. But we are lucky. They've made an incredible investment in the staff and the facility.
Oh, it's a beautiful facility. And when you're in the sleep center as the patient, are you hooked up to a monitor or something like that?
Well, when you come in and see me, you'll be interviewed as in a consultation. And depending on what time of the day, so if we were to study Dr. Cheetham, she might naturally want to be a night owl, go to bed at 2 a.m. and wake up at 12 noon. So she would be put into a suite, and many sensors would be attached to her on her head, her arms, her legs, her heart, her lungs. Nothing painful. It's all adhesive. And then you go into a room that looks like the Four Seasons with your flat screen television and your private restroom. Even though we don't agree with televisions in the bedroom, patients want to bring them in. They'll bring their BlackBerries in. They'll bring their iPads in.
Can they bring their partner in?
No, not typically, no. But we have sometimes when we have an anxious family member or a child, we may have a surrogate family member there, and we often diagnose or we make some observations that suggest this person needs a sleep evaluation. And then we measure all aspects of your sleep, videotape, audio tape, biological signals, and in the morning you're disconnected and you go home. Later, after a series of evaluations, we issue a report and we show you what it reveals.
Are people embarrassed to have somebody watching them?
Some people are very
not only embarrassed, but is it difficult because you're hooked up to all these different things? Does that impede your sleep at all?
It can have a number of factors, and some people are very shy. Some people are afraid. Some people have unfortunately been victims of certain assaults or crimes, so they are very apprehensive at nighttime. We have an unbelievable technical and highly trained staff that reassure all kinds of patients. We take care of children. We take care of people in group homes, very challenged illnesses. So we can, even people with language barriers, we can cope with really anything. But if I think that there's an apprehension, they will come in and look at the suite with me, and we will plan the step together so they know what to expect.
And what about temperature control? Because I like to sleep in a really warm room, but many people like a cold room. Can you control the temperature?
We can, and we also tell people, bring what you think will make you comfortable. Bring your flannel pajamas, bring your favorite pillow, bring whatever it is that you need.
There you go, Aaron. You can take your satin sheets into the sleep
Bring your
center.
teddy bear if that's what you need.
And you say insurance companies will cover for this, because I'm sure it's expensive. You've got technicians there. You've got a beautiful suite there.
Yes, we take care of patients on all insurances, including patients on insurances that are prevalent in this state. And we have to get permission from the insurance companies, so we make the clinical case for why they need a study.
And is it a one-time thing? You just come in there and you have the sleep? And
Great question. It may be more than once. It may be more than once. It may be a diagnostic study. If we find that you're stopping breathing and there is some sleep apnea, we may need to come in and treat you with a CPAP device.
What are the technicians doing? Are they monitoring movements, or? The
technicians are interpreting the electrical signals, making sure the patient's needs are met, reassuring the patient, making interventions if someone has very serious gaps in their breathing and their heart rhythm is becoming irregular. They jump in and treat. They call the physicians. They're educating, and they're making observations.
And let's go back to the snoring for a moment.
Sure.
The CPAP, you say. What is that? Is that?
Well, we probably have to devote another show to that.
Okay.
But CPAP means continuous positive airway pressure. It's a sleep apnea mask, and it was developed from the field of actually fighter pilots, how when they didn't have pressurized cabins, they have a pressurized column of air. That's exactly what inflates the airway in people with sleep apnea. But there are many other treatments for sleep apnea right now.
But so you're sleeping with a mask then?
If that is your diagnosis, and we've decided to do a treatment study.
And is that something that you would probably need to sleep with this mask for a little bit of time, and then you're cured? Is it a
Great question. Once you have obstructive sleep apnea, it is going to be with you for life, for the most part, for most adults. In children, the key to diagnose them early is they can be eliminated. 1 out of 3 children can be cured.
And certainly one of the easiest ways to help reduce snoring is to lose weight, isn't it? If you're a big guy, you're going to snore
Yes
more.
and no, because people who are even of normal weight or underweight can have severe obstructive sleep apnea. That's one of the myths that we have to bust. But weight loss helps men more than women in reducing snoring, but it's not a primary treatment for sleep apnea.
Do you recommend that to people who snore a lot if they're overweight?
After we have determined whether or not they have sleep apnea and we have corrected sleep deprivation, then we work on weight.
Okay.
And one other thing about foods, you touched a little bit about some foods. I assume that there should be a time point between when you have dinner and go to sleep.
Yeah, we generally say no eating for 2 hours before bed to avoid gastroesophageal reflux, which is also very prevalent and increased in the sleep apnea patient.
And are there other foods that you recommend that help induce and stimulate sleep?
No, because
No?
if we have treated your sleep disorder, we should be able to get you to naturally fall asleep in response to your own intrinsic cues.
And yet they market things like Ovaltine and Horlicks, milky drinks, hot chocolate before you go to bed, and yet you're saying...
Hot chocolate would be a definite no-no. Caffeine and reflux, so that's not putting you to sleep.
Yeah, plus that has a lot of sugar in it too,
Yes.
the hot cocoa, so that wouldn't be good, right?
No, that's true.
Are there any websites that you can recommend to educate people about sleep that you give out?
I often tell patients to just look for the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. They have information for patients and physicians.
Say that again, Conta.
The American Academy of Sleep Medicine, Google them and look for patient information. And there's a great one by my colleague at Harvard called understandingsleep.org, which is ORG, which is all about sleep information for patients.
Well, this was great. I mean, I love your approach. You have a terrific center out there, running or help run this center with your colleagues there at Winthrop. It's a state-of-the-art center, and I would encourage all the listeners, if this is affecting you, which obviously it affects so many people and their spouses and your productivity during the day, that you should call Dr. Kanta Ahmed at 516-663-3907, or you can visit her at winthrop.org. Philippa, any other thoughts?
Fantastic show. I know that we're going to get great feedback from my dad, who will be very interested in what you've been saying about snoring, drinking alcohol at night, getting up at night to go to the bathroom. Aaron, just one question. Can I come to work at 11 o'clock in the morning for an hour?
Absolutely not. You know, the Winthrop rules, we start at 8. But it is interesting to see that it's not all about Ambien, isn't it?
That's exactly right. And I want to congratulate you for bringing important public health information to light.
Thank you again. You are a wonderful guest. That's Dr. Kanta Ahmed at Winthrop University Hospital Sleep Disorder Center at winthrop.org. We'll see you next weekend. Have a great day. This is Dr. Aaron Katz.